Really. So, what can the separatists and the other passengers aboard the Mayflower do at this point? And there really wasn't anything they could do. They'd sold their homes, most of their possessions, uprooted themselves. They had nowhere to go in England. King James had made it very clear he did not want them in England. And so they really don't have any other choice but to accept the changed terms of the contract and try to move forward. So they finally all distribute themselves between the two boats, the Speedwell and the Mayflower. And on August 5th, they leave Southampton and start to sail west. Almost immediately, the Speedwell begins to leak. So they put back into port, they make some repairs, they set out a second time, and the Speedwell leaks a second time. They put back into port, make some repairs, sail out again, and it leaks for the third time. At this point, they simply decide this ship isn't seaworthy, we're going to leave it behind, we're going to load everyone onto the Mayflower, and then set sail. So this is what they do. So in the end, there are 102 passengers aboard the Mayflower. It's quite crowded at this point. There's probably something like about 30 crew. The names of most of the crew members were never written down, so we don't know exactly who most of them were or how many, but it was probably around 30-ish. The sea voyage on the Mayflower was a very uncomfortable one for the passengers. So it helps to know a little bit about how the Mayflower was constructed to kind of understand what was happening. So the Mayflower is on the main deck about 100 feet long. The passengers spend most of their time in what's called the 'tween decks. So this is a space that's below the top deck but above the cargo hold. So this space would probably have been about 75 feet long, roughly. It helps to picture a basketball court. So a basketball court is about 100 feet by 50 feet. So you would chop off about 1/4 of the length of the basketball court. That's about 75 feet. The boat was only 25 feet wide, so you have to then kind of slice off half of the width of the basketball court. So you have a much smaller space at this point. The 'tween decks was believed to be no higher than 5 feet. Although people were shorter in that time period, there certainly were people who were taller than 5 feet. And even if you weren't at 5 feet, to have to live in a space where the ceiling is right above your head is kind of oppressive. So here you are in this space, 75 feet by 25 feet, roughly, very, very low ceiling, not much light, not much air. And into this space you cram yourself and 101 of your closest friends. Then you stay there for 65 days. Of course, with you in that space, you have all the personal belongings you've brought, clothing, kitchen utensils, farming utensils, tools needed for building houses, all kinds of things. We do know that they brought chickens with them. And of course, there would have been lots of chamber pots. So it was not a pleasant space to have to spend 65 days in. So they set off for their Atlantic crossing. They discover, they finally leave on September 6th. And the month of September really isn't too bad. But in the month of October, they hit very, very bad storms. There are times when they really feel that the ship might sink. In some of these storms, Master Jones used a maneuver known as lying a hull. Basically, this means you take down all of your sail, You secure the helm to leeward. That's so that the prow of the ship, the front of the ship, is pointing into the waves. And then they would pretty much abandon the deck and literally all go below and pray that the ship wasn't wrecked. This actually worked fairly well for them. The worst thing you can do in a storm in a ship is to end up in a situation where the boat is parallel to the waves. This could create a situation where a wave comes along, washes completely over the ship ends up completely underwater, and that's obviously most people out in the open ocean are not going to survive that kind of event. So what you want to do is to keep the prow of the ship pointing into the waves so that you can hopefully ride over them. And it's interesting that in 1957, the Mayflower II was actually built in England. It was a gift to the American people to thank them for their aid in World War II. So in 1957, the Mayflower II has to sail from England to Massachusetts, and they get caught in some very bad storms. So the captain of the Mayflower II, whose name was Alan Villiers, a very, very experienced blue water captain, has, of course, read all about the first Mayflower and says, well, okay, so let's try lying a hull here. So he does this, and he says that the ship sat like a contented duck in the middle of the storm. So why did this happen? So here's the Mayflower II. You may be able to see that at the stern, that's the back of the ship, there's this very high deck, which is called the poop deck. They believe that this high deck really helped to stabilize the boat. So you're facing into the wind. The wind then is pushing against the high poop deck. This has the effect of raising the bow of the ship just slightly. So again, that helps you to ride on the waves. You certainly don't want the bow tipping downward, because then once again, you're in a situation where the boat's going to be engulfed. Interesting that in the 20th century, they found that this maneuver worked as well as it did in 1620. During some of these October storms, or during one storm in particular, a young man named John Howland, we're not sure exactly how old he is, but he was probably 20-ish. Like a lot of young men of that age, was something of a risk taker and a thrill seeker. And he decides that during one of these storms, he's going to go up on deck and kind of see what it's like. So in fairly short order, he is washed overboard. He manages to grab a line that's trailing in the water, and the crew haul him back in. He's none the worse for wear, but certainly a noteworthy moment in the journey. And today there are literally thousands and thousands of people who are descended from John Howland. So if he hadn't been quite so fortunate, we would be missing all those people. So another major event on the crossing was that Elizabeth Hopkins, who, along with two other women, was in her third trimester of pregnancy when they left England. Elizabeth Hopkins gave birth during the crossing. We don't know the exact date, it wasn't written down, but she gives birth to a baby boy who is very appropriately named Oceanus. Finally, after 65 long days at sea, they sight land. It's November 9th. And they pretty quickly figure out that they are too far north. Remember, what they had been aiming for was the mouth of the Hudson River, or present-day New York City. So they realize fairly quickly that they're too far north. We don't know exactly what maps Master Jones had with him, but the coast of New England had been mapped by several explorers, including Samuel de Champlain, and John Smith, better known of Jamestown fame. But it's likely that even if he didn't have these maps with him, that he had at least seen them. So he figures out very quickly that they're too far north and thinks, well, I'll just turn south and that we'll be there shortly. Unfortunately, when he turns south, he gets caught up in a whole long series of sandbars and shoals along the sort of back arm and the elbow of Cape Cod. One of these is known as Pollock Rip. It's an area where literally thousands of ships have wrecked over the centuries. So he tries to press on southward and ultimately decides this is simply too dangerous. If we try to keep going on, the ship is going to wreck. So he turns back north again and heads for the nearest safe harbor, which of course is up at the very tip of Cape Cod in what is today Provincetown Harbor. So it's at this place where they finally drop anchor on Saturday, November 11th. Join us for our next video, which is going to talk a little bit about the Wampanoag people who were here on Cape Cod when the Mayflower arrived, and what transpired between the two groups.